Sequences, well, I thought if Bach were presiding over cadential progressions, then no one deserves to preside over sequences more than Handel, who understood that if you do a sequence 3 times, it is tasteful. If you do it 6 times, it is verging on bad taste. So he never did that. He would go fully around and get us to 10 or 11, and we're back to something really miraculous to behold. So he is the king of sequences. So sequences, descending fifths, ascending fourths, descending thirds, and sevenths. It sounds scary. But I maintain that intermediate level piano students can be playing these and learning them and having a lot of fun with them before they're ever involved in formal theory. So the most common, the most ubiquitous sequence, of course, is the descending fifth sequence. This is also a mainstay of keyboard harmony instruction. All students on keyboard harmony exams are expected to play sequences in a specified number of keys. So we can also take this into the minor key. Now, I said earlier that I would get to that part of the presentation where I talk about better results on harmony exams. And my main thesis is that it's inevitable if this is the kind of activity they're engaged in as they're also learning their Clementi sonatinas and Bach minuets. But there are a lot of things you learn when you play sequences, and one is don't mess with the sequence. And you could say that in a harmony class and say, oh, do maintain sequential voice leading, it's very important. But as a visual, as dots on a page, that's not very compelling. If you're the person playing the sequence, you will maintain sequential voice leading because you're going to fall flat on your face if you don't. Right? What else can you learn just from playing a cycle of fifths sequence? Well, I think you learn something about harmony in minor keys, that although 7 in Rudiments textbooks is often referred to as a diminished triad, and 3 is referred to as an augmented triad, that in fact, we see them most often as flat 7 and as major triads, that this is their most usable kind of format. So there are all sorts of principles of voice leading that are being absorbed at the Neuro-Harmony level, if you'll allow me to use that silly word again. And they're not being discussed. They're not having to read them in a textbook. They're just absorbing it by doing it. Inversions. So a cycle of fifths sequence obviously can be inverted. Either the first chord or the second in the pair. We can have a bass line like this. Sound like that. Or we can invert the first chord. And the other one. This is important to know. It's important to be playing inversions before we get to written harmony so that we don't look at bass lines and think it's okay to harmonize a chorale. It starts to sound like a Jeopardy theme, or what we call the timpani effect in the left hand, so that we get a smoother handling of bass lines. I should tell you a story. I'm going to stop for an anecdote. Another student who amazed me when I was doing a post-mortem with her on a written harmony paper. She had been a really great student all year. She had done beautiful things. She had studied piano with me as well, so she had all these sequences and standard progressions built right into her fingertips. In fact, I think right into her DNA. And so we were going over a rather appalling harmony paper. And I should probably stop telling stories. I think all my students do bizarre things when they get to examinations. But I was looking at something absolutely inexplicable, because besides these sequences, we had looked at many standard beginnings. I decided to try out the chord of 3-6-4 so many times. You remember all those other progressions that you wrote and that we had played, those the ones that sounded good? And what I got was, oh no, but I had been doing those all year. They were so obvious. I mean, that's the kind of thing Bach would have done. So, note to self after that discussion was revise course description and to be more clear about what the purpose of a written harmony course is. But generally, I think that we're headed for greater success when these things are built into the neuro-harmonic level. Descending fifths, open any lower or intermediate grade book and you will find cycle of fifth sequences scattered throughout. And in more august places as well. Of the third movement of Beethoven's Half of Tea. It's a little theme and variations embedded in the middle of this rondo movement, and which he says, let's just take a moment out and enjoy the cycle of fifth sequence. And he gives it to us every which way, up and down, left hand to right hand. It's a wonderful little moment in that otherwise very tempestuous final movement of the Half of Tea. Again, when you can find repertoire that is meaningful, either because the student's working on it or something that they have listened to or like, or it might be something that relates to a history curriculum, to illustrate the things you're trying to build into their hands is much more valuable. So we have ascending fifths. Now the ascending fifths sequence, there are different ways of thinking of this. You can think of it as the retrograde of the descending fifths. If I take the ascending fifths and run it backwards, I of course have a descending fifth sequence. Now, there's one little rough patch in there, and this is also a teaching moment. I've had students wrinkle their noses and look at me when they get to 3 to 7. Now, we know from teaching harmony that sequences have their own physical laws, that what operates outside of a sequence isn't the same as what operates in a sequence. You can double leading notes, you can use the chord of 7 convincingly in written position because the logic and the momentum of the sequence takes over and becomes the most important factor while you're in the sequence. But even that, yeah, you're wrinkling your nose too. Yeah, that feels a little harsh. So we don't always get a descending fifth sequence presented in repertoire and music in its complete form. We often get this. Think Dvorak and Rusalka's Song to the Moon. That's a beautiful little example of the ascending fifth sequence. Here's a study that you may remember. It's a Heller study. So right there, we have that ascending fifth sequence again. And once you start putting these things in your own ears, you'll find them everywhere you look. It's like when you learn a new word, a word that you've never heard before. I remember the first time I heard someone say, yes, that's copacetic. And I thought, copacetic? So I've since looked it up. I got its origin. And I swear that week I must have heard that word at least half a dozen times. Everyone was saying that everything was copacetic, whether it was or not. So once we start listening for these things and our students start listening, they will come up with ideas and say, hey, that's the progression in my sonata movement, or that's the same progression in that piece I like